Everyone in the county told Mara Ellis she was storing her corn the wrong way. She didn't argue. She simply kept filling the bins. By October, 1,300 bushels sat on her farm. But instead of putting every kernel into the newest steel grain bin like her neighbors, Mara had divided the crop between several old-fashioned storage systems. Some corn went into a renovated wooden crib, some went into smaller sealed bins, and some went into carefully monitored low-temperature storage. Her neighbors thought it was ridiculous. "You're wasting space. You're going to lose half of it. Sell it now and be done with it." Mara only smiled. "I'd rather know exactly what I have." They didn't understand what she was doing. Not yet. Mara was 33 and operated a modest grain farm in central Missouri. She had inherited 110 acres from her grandfather. The farm wasn't large enough to compete with the biggest operations, so she had learned to compete differently. She watched expenses. She tracked moisture. She studied local grain prices. And she hated making decisions simply because everyone else made them. Her grandfather had taught her something she never forgot. Harvesting isn't the end of farming. It's when the next decision begins. That sentence became important after one unusually productive summer. The corn harvest was enormous. Mara's fields produced far more grain than expected. She finished harvesting with approximately 1,300 bushels. That should have been good news. But the local elevator was offering a disappointing price. Several farmers sold immediately anyway. They needed cash. They needed bin space. And nobody wanted to gamble on what prices might do later. Mara studied the numbers. The price wasn't terrible. It simply wasn't good enough. So she decided to store. That was when the criticism began. Her neighbor Earl Dawson watched workers unload grain into Mara's renovated wooden crib. "You really keeping corn in that old thing? It's been cleaned and inspected. It looks like something from my grandfather's farm." "Mine too." Earl shook his head. "You're asking for spoilage." Mara checked the temperature sensor. "That's why I'm monitoring it." He pointed toward the steel bins. "Modern storage exists for a reason." "Absolutely. Then why aren't you using it?" Mara smiled. "Because modern doesn't automatically mean appropriate." Earl laughed. "You're going to learn." Mara wasn't rejecting modern grain storage. She was trying to match storage conditions to the crop. She cleaned every storage area thoroughly. She checked moisture content. She inspected the corn for damaged kernels. She measured temperature. She installed basic monitoring equipment. And she divided the crop into separate lots. That last decision confused everyone. Why not put all 1,300 bushels together? Mara had a reason. If something went wrong in one storage area, she didn't want to lose everything. One bad pocket of moisture shouldn't destroy the entire crop. She labeled each lot. A. Dry corn. B. Lower moisture. C. Reserve. Every week, Mara checked the temperature. Every few weeks, she inspected the grain. She recorded the numbers. Her storage notebook became thicker than her planting notebook. Earl thought it was excessive. "You check that corn like it's a newborn." Mara laughed. "Newborns don't generate 6 months of income." Winter arrived. The grain stayed stable. Prices barely moved. Mara didn't sell. January passed. Then February. The elevator price rose slightly. Several farmers sold. Mara waited. She wasn't trying to guess the market perfectly. She had set a target price based on her costs and desired margin. Until the market reached it, the corn stayed on the farm. Then March brought an unexpected problem. A major storm damaged transportation routes across several states. Rail shipments slowed. Trucking became more expensive. Grain movement tightened. Prices began climbing. Mara's phone started ringing. The local elevator wanted to know whether she had corn available. "We can take some this week." Mara checked her records. "At what price?" The buyer gave her a number. Mara declined. "That's not enough." The buyer laughed. "You think prices are going higher?" "I don't know." "Then why wait?" "Because I don't need to sell today." That was the advantage of storage. She wasn't forced to sell simply because harvest was over. By April, another problem appeared. A severe drought had hit major growing regions farther south. Early planting reports were poor. Farmers were worried. Feed companies became nervous. Corn buyers began competing for available supplies. The local price climbed again. Earl called Mara. "Are you watching the market?" "Yes." "How much do you still have?" "About 1,100 bushels." There was silence. "You still have that much?" Mara smiled. "Most of it." Then came the news that changed everything. A combination of poor growing conditions, transportation disruptions, and panic buying created a severe regional grain shortage. It wasn't literally a nationwide famine, but in Mara's area, feed supplies tightened dramatically. Livestock operations needed corn. Feed mills needed corn. Local buyers needed corn. And farmers who had sold everything at harvest suddenly had nothing left to sell. The price jumped sharply. Earl drove to Mara's farm. He found her standing beside the storage bins. He looked at her. "How much do you have?" Mara checked her notebook. "Enough." "Enough for what?" "Enough to wait." The next morning, the elevator offered a price Mara had never seen before. She still didn't accept immediately. Instead, she called 3 buyers, then 2 feed mills, then a livestock cooperative. She compared offers. One buyer needed corn immediately. Another offered more, but wanted a delayed delivery. Mara calculated transportation costs, storage costs, expected shrink, taxes, everything. Then she sold the first lot. The money that arrived in her account made her sit down. One storage lot had generated more profit than she had earned from the entire previous year's grain crop. But she still had corn remaining. Earl couldn't believe it. "You actually made that much?" Mara nodded. "I'm part of it." He stared at the storage bins. "How much is the rest worth?" "I don't know yet." "You're not selling?" "Not all of it." Earl laughed. "After everyone told you that storage method was wrong?" Mara closed the notebook. "I never said my method was perfect." She looked toward the bins. "I just wanted auctions." Then the shortage worsened. Feed mills began rationing purchases. Some livestock producers were paying almost anything for reliable local corn. And suddenly, the 1,300 bushels everyone had told Mara to sell immediately became one of the most valuable assets on her farm. But there was still one problem. Mara's storage system had worked so far. Could it keep the remaining grain stable long enough for her to sell it at the price she wanted? Because if the corn spoiled now, every dollar of profit could disappear. And the next inspection was about to reveal whether her supposedly wrong storage method had actually worked. The next inspection happened before sunrise. Mara opened the old wooden crib first. She checked the temperature, then moisture, then the grain itself. She scooped a sample into her hand and examined the kernels. Dry, firm, no strange odor, no visible mold. She checked the sealed bins. Same result. The corn was holding. Her supposedly wrong storage system had survived the winter and the first months of spring. But Mara didn't celebrate yet. She knew grain could deteriorate quickly when temperatures changed. So she kept monitoring. Dr. Leah Morgan, an agricultural storage specialist, visited the farm that afternoon. Mara showed her the records. Leah studied the temperature charts. Then she inspected the grain. "You've done something important here." Mara raised an eyebrow. "What? You didn't simply store corn." Leah pointed toward the separate lots. "You separated risk." Mara nodded. Leah continued. "If one storage environment had developed a problem, you wouldn't have lost the entire crop." Mara smiled. "That was the idea. And you've been monitoring the grain instead of assuming the storage structure would take care of itself." Mara looked at the old wooden crib. "That's what everyone thought was wrong." Leah laughed. "The building isn't what matters most. Then what does? Moisture, temperature, grain condition, airflow, monitoring, and management." The news spread. Farmers who had mocked Mara's storage system started asking questions. Earl was first. He walked into the barn holding a notebook. "How are you keeping the corn in that old crib?" Mara explained. He wrote everything down. "How often do you check?" "Regularly." "What moisture level?" Mara gave him the range she had recorded. Earl nodded. Then he asked, "How much did the equipment cost?" "Less than a new grain bin." He stared at her. "Don't tell anyone." Mara laughed. But the market was still changing. Feed shortages continued. Livestock producers were competing for available grain. Transportation costs remained high. Mara's remaining corn became increasingly valuable. She still refused to panic. Instead, she divided her remaining inventory into smaller sale lots. One buyer received a portion. Another received another. She never depended on a single customer. And she never sold more than she could comfortably deliver. That strategy protected her from being trapped by one contract. By early summer, the price reached another record. Mara sold her second major lot. This time, the buyer sent a truck directly to her farm. Workers loaded the corn. Mara watched the scale. The number climbed. When the truck left, she checked her account. Her total profit had crossed into 6 figures. She stared at the screen. For years, she'd dreamed of earning that kind of money from farming. But it hadn't come from planting more acres. It hadn't come from buying bigger equipment. It had come from managing what she already had. Earl arrived later that afternoon. He didn't say anything at first. He simply looked at Mara, then the storage bins, then the empty truck tracks. Finally he laughed. "I hate this." Mara smiled. "You don't." "I do." "Why?" "Because you were right." Mara shook her head. "I wasn't right about everything. You made 6 figures. That doesn't mean every old storage method works." Earl nodded. Mara continued. "The lesson isn't that old storage is better. Then what is it? That you should understand the conditions before deciding what system you need." The remaining corn stayed in storage. Mara had no reason to sell it immediately. The market remained unpredictable. Eventually, prices began falling. Feed supplies improved. Transportation returned to normal. The panic faded. Mara sold the final lot when the price reached her predetermined target. It wasn't the highest price of the entire crisis, but it was profitable. Very profitable. When everything was calculated, sales, storage costs, handling, transportation, shrink, and operating expenses, Mara's corn operation had generated a 6-figure profit. She hadn't become rich overnight. She had simply refused to sell an entire year's work at the first available price. The County Agricultural Association invited Mara to speak. She stood before a room full of farmers who had once criticized her. Her presentation began with a photograph of the old wooden corn crib. Then she showed the storage records, temperature charts, moisture readings, inspection schedules, sales dates, market prices, profit calculations. Nobody laughed. Mara pointed to the final figure. "This isn't proof that everyone should store grain like I did." She paused. "It's proof that storage is a management decision." A farmer in the back asked, "Would you do the same thing again?" Mara thought for a moment. "Yes." Then she added, "But I'd change parts of it." That answer surprised everyone. She explained that technology had improved. Better sensors existed. Better monitoring systems existed. Better storage structures existed. She would use whatever combination made economic sense. Her real mistake, she said, would be copying her own method without examining the conditions. The story became larger than the money. Several farmers began separating grain into multiple storage lots. Others invested in monitoring equipment. Some delayed sales when they had enough storage capacity and financial flexibility. Others decided immediate sale was better for their operations. Mara encouraged all of them to calculate their own numbers. Storage wasn't free. Grain could spoil. Markets could fall. Interest costs mattered. Transportation mattered. Insurance mattered. There was no universal answer. Burl eventually built a new storage system. Mara visited him during construction. He pointed proudly toward the steel structure. "Modern enough for you?" Mara laughed. "Very. But I copied one thing from you." "What?" He pointed toward several smaller storage compartments. Separate lots. Mara smiled. "Good. I also installed temperature monitoring. Even better. And I still check it myself." Mara nodded. Best part. Years later, Mara still kept the original storage notebook. The pages were stained with grain dust. The numbers were written in different colored ink. Some entries showed temperature changes. Others showed inspection results. One page contained the first major sale. At the bottom, Mara had written, "Patience is only useful if the grain survives." That sentence became her favorite lesson. She had never made 6 figures because she stored corn in an old wooden crib. She made 6 figures because she understood what she was storing, managed the risks, watched the market, and refused to make a rushed decision simply because everyone else was rushing. The town had called her method wrong. But the real mistake would have been believing there was only one right way to farm. Mara looked across her fields that summer. The corn was growing again. Another harvest was coming. This time, nobody told her what to do. They simply asked, "How are you storing yours?" Mara smiled. "Let's look at the numbers first."